Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today we're going to be talking about hand shots that you use to provoke a mid-range fight. So as I talked about in my last video, Connor did very well at a recent tournament, particularly by utilizing these feinted or really intentioned hand strikes to provoke more attacks from his opponent that he can effectively parry, repost, and use his mezzo tempos, or what I would just call a basic, duplirin, to capitalize on an overextension and an overcommitment from his opponent. So the first thing to break down is the hand shot, and in particular, why this hand shot works as a provocation where other hand shots might not. In this particular case, Connor comes forward and throws a, in this case, missed underslice and undercut to my hands. And the reason that this is a much more protected cut than you would say like a big Oberhau to my hands is in the range of motion that the sword has in order to start and complete its task. So if you look at this frame here, you say that the sword starts right about here. And then if you go further in, the cut ends right about here. And if you look at that, that is not a lot of range of motion for a sword to cover. And what that means is that it's both a quick and effective strike, but it also means that once the strike hits or misses, it's very easy to return to a more defensive, almost long point or plow style position here than it would be if you had thrown a full Oberhau, and regardless of whether or not you landed on the hands or not, your arms were all the way out, all the way down. This is a bent arm defensive position that Connor can use to get out of the response cut that I'm about to throw, which in this case is I basically throw a little tap to Connor's sword, mostly to figure out where it is and make sure I'm not going to get stabbed immediately. And then to throw a left Oberhau, left Zwerchhau kind of thing that I was overextended doing. And the reason I say I'm overextended doing it is that if you look carefully right here, this is the end of my sword. And accounting for three-dimensional space, it's very unlikely that this would have actually managed to hit my opponent's head. What's far more likely is that if that crossguard wasn't in the way, I maybe would have gotten a hit on the hands if there was no block put up. But in this particular case, there was a block put up. So the only thing I really had to hit was my opponent's sword. And what that did was that it made it, extremely easy to throw this half tempo cut immediately after. So you look at it, goes in here. This is the parry, and not 3, 4, 5 frames later, the response cut is coming out. I'm still trying to recover from my big passing step. And before my next step even hits the ground, I've already been hit. And as I'm throwing my response cut after being hit, my opponent puts up his wall guard and parries the afterblow. So it's a perfect little encapsulation of a mid-range exchange, but it all starts off with that little hand shot coming forward. So one last thing to emphasize with this is that if you're going to look to throw these kinds of provoking hand strikes of your own, the one thing you have to make sure of is that, one, you're coming in at a bit of an awkward angle, and two, that when you throw them, you have to make sure that you can get in and get out very, very quickly. So if we watch this one more time, what you want to pay attention to is where Connor's feet are during this entire first bit of the exchange. If you look right here, this is his right foot. He's left-handed. So this is where all of his weight is and where all of his momentum is. If you pay very close attention to that, throughout this entire exchange, you will see that his foot does not move from this spot. And more importantly, if you go all the way back to the beginning again, you will see that he throws this first cut, pulls back, parries, and then immediately after this parry happens, throws that next cut before this foot has left the ground. A lot of people would say that it's dangerous sometimes to overcommit with your feet and your momentum into an attack, but I don't think that is actually what happened here, because if you, again, watch this, you'll see that as the momentum is coming forward here, immediately after this strike lands, you see through the action of Connor's knee that he is pushing backwards with a lot of force in his front foot. He's equalizing out the momentum he had moving forward with his initial attack, and now he's putting an even bigger force backward that after these, couple of frames is going to send him backwards far enough so that he can get the distance back to parry. And it's important to note that he does all of this almost as quickly or even a little bit faster than I push my own momentum forward. So if we look at my feet, right after this little hand strike misses, you'll see my front foot here start to go forward. And right after that attack misses, I do my own little lunge here forward. But if you look at where I land, I've moved maybe the tiniest little lunge forward, whereas Connor has managed to move back that exact same distance with his head and with his shoulders in the time that matters. So we look at sort of this distance from where Connor's shoulders traveled versus this distance where my shoulders traveled. You'll see they line up more or less with my feet, but they don't line up with his. And that's because this feinted hand strike that he threw in utilized what I would call sort of Meyer style footwork, or at the very least, a lean that gives you the distance and the provocation that you need to make somebody think that you are overextended from this position here, only to then push back with that same leg you've landed on, roll your entire torso backwards, and get out of distance before the threat can reasonably reach you. So what all of this comes together to mean is that right after Connor has successfully provoked my counterattack with his provoking strike, he maintains his distance with tricky torso movement and static footwork and a whole lot of leg strength to bait me into doing a committed forward strike with my leg while his has stayed exactly where it is and beat me in the mid game with his mezzo tempos. So if you want to try this yourself, those are all the components that you need to add together. It's a lot, but if it's something that you practice, it's something that you can pull off pretty reasonably. Because at the end of the day, whenever you throw an attack at somebody, 9 times out of the 10, the first thing that's going to go through their mind is, was I hit? And if the answer is no, then you can reasonably guarantee that a follow-up strike should come, because any reasonably, attentive fencer is going to know that anytime something misses, that's always an opportunity to strike. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send an email over at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.